strategies would you recommend in terms of offering new opportunities for taming globalization in regards to the G20 and the G8?
Well, I mean, with this summit in particular, this G8, G20 summit, they're calling it the austerity summit, because this is really the summit where, after this huge binge of spending money on elites to fix the problems that they created, now they're sticking working people, unemployed people, the most vulnerable people in the world with the bill. So we see in some very concrete ways how this affects women. I mean, in some ways it's subtle in terms of that we always know that women bear the greatest burden of neoliberal economic policies. When there are shortages, it's women who bear the burden. They bear the burden of migration, of sending money home. But even more directly than that, I mean, you have a case like, for instance, in California in the United States, where because of the decision to save the elites, to save the banks, and not to save the people who were being foreclosed on in their homes and who are losing their jobs, a state like California has a massive budget crisis. And so how did the governor of California propose to pay the bill? Well, he came up with a series of cuts to schools, to universities, to parks, but also he cut all of the funding to women's shelters, to services for women who are dealing with violence, which is really incredible, because actually we know that in times of economic hardship, that domestic violence increases. So, in some ways the effects on women are subtle. In some ways they're not subtle at all. In that case, it was interesting because the women in California, feminist organizations, mobilized, and there was such an outcry, in part because it was Arnold Schwarzenegger and he has a reputation for sexism, very well known. They were able to win temporarily. And so it's an example of how you can, if you fight back, if you're organized, if you use shame. They were able to win a victory, and he had to reinstate the funding to women's shelters and hotlines and things like that. But it also points to an opportunity, and it's a sad kind of opportunity, but the truth is that we're familiar with this type of opportunity within neoliberalism, which is that you have these policies, whether it's the International Monetary Fund or the World Trade Organization, that are so that are so sweeping and affect every sector of society all at once. And you have these moments of what is often described as shock therapy, where everybody gets it all at once, that in some ways they build our coalitions for us if we're smart, because here you have a moment like right here in Toronto where the homeless are marching today against cuts to social assistance, and this is a group, the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, that's a very radical group that organized today's demonstration, and it tends to be marginalized by the large labor unions and the big NGOs. But you're starting to see a different feeling, because everybody understands that we're all under threat, and everybody in this whole city is being treated as a criminal. So in a strange way, it creates a solidarity between the people who've always been treated as criminals, and suddenly it breaks down a barrier. So you have physical barriers going up in the form of the fence, but then you also have psychological barriers going down. Even the fact that some of the speakers here tonight walked over to an OCAP rally, it's actually a big deal. OCAP has been very, very attacked by big social movements, official social movements, big NGOs, because they use direct action and they're confrontational. So we're starting to see maybe some new forms of solidarity. The last thing I would just say is that this idea of interconnectivity, it's interesting, because the reason why we find ourselves in a global economic crisis is because of another kind of interconnectivity in the elites, where you had these financial institutions that had so merged and intermingled that we were told, if one company goes down, like Lehman Brothers or AIG, that they're so intermingled in every aspect of the economy that the whole economy will fail. And so they became protected because of their intermingledness. So, you know, I think that's very dangerous when it comes to a bank, but I think it's a valuable lesson for working people, for unemployed people, for women's organizations, for LGBT groups, that actually the key is to become so intermingled that we're too big to fail, too big to be marginalized.
Thank you.